Recent polls from the Battleground state of Florida show a very close race between President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden. While it appears that Biden has maintained a narrow lead, that's certainly subject to change as ballots flow in and Election Day draws nearer.
So joining us now to talk more about where each candidate stands in the Sunshine State is voting behavior consultant and contributor to Florida Squeeze, David Trotter. Welcome, David, to the show. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Absolutely.
So you really have been tracking turnout there very closely, enthusiasm on the Republican and Democratic side. We have a couple of maps that you created to actually break this down. Just explain what you've been doing and what you're seeing so far.
So actually, it's kind of interesting because what we're seeing so far is not necessarily anything different than what we've seen in the past, except for everything is different. So the voting patterns that we usually see are not happening. So usually Democrats do quite well in early vote. Republicans do slightly better in vote by mail. The flip is happening this time. And so we are seeing different patterns, but looking at the overall numbers, they're averaging out to about the same at this point in the election as far as turnout's concerned. And it basically makes it a toss-up.
It's really interesting, Dave. I mean, we've been saying here basically how Florida goes on Election Day, basically tells you the story. If Biden wins Florida, it's basically game over for Trump. What are we missing here in Washington about what's happening in Florida, that story that we might find out on Election Day?
Well, I think, there's a difference between how Democrats and Republicans in the state operate in the state. So Republicans look at the state holistically, and they try to bring down margins in a lot of Democratic counties. So instead of getting 70% in Broward, the Republicans want the Democrats to get 68 in Broward or 67 in Broward. So I think in places like Miami-Dade, we are seeing Republicans do a lot better than maybe they should be doing. This is one of the contributing reasons for Andrew Gillum losing last time around is Miami-Dade didn't perform as well as maybe it should have overall, whereas Democrats kind of look at everything, run up the South Florida, do well in some other counties, and kind of ignore the rest of those state. And bringing down those margins statewide has been a real challenge for Democrats. And this is where you might see it play out. So it's not really looking at it holistically as much as where these 2, 3, 4 point margins in these counties really making a difference.
So let's throw one of your maps up on the screen here, and you can tell us what we're looking at here. If we can put the first one up. Okay, so we've got the NowCast model, and you've got Biden with a very narrow edge over Trump. You say this based on 2016 and 2018 voting patterns based on the votes that are already cast. So you're not actually predicting here what the final vote would be. You're predicting what the vote margin is today based on what's already been cast. Can you just break this down for us a little bit here, and we can keep this up on the screen while you're talking?
Okay, yeah, correct. That's exactly it. So the assumption is if registered Democrats are more likely to vote Democratic, and the same thing with Republicans on the Republican side, how does the rest of the vote split up? So obviously, we see North Florida counties where there are a lot more Democrats actually registered to vote than Republicans, but we see the model showing that it's very strong for the Republicans. So what it does is it takes the patterns from both 2018, 2016, integrates them together, and then just kind of gets an average of basically how the NPA or non-party affiliated votes break. So this is like that right now. There's a 2018 model that has it about 3.5 points for Biden, and the 2016 model, which replicates the 2016 voting behavior, shows Trump with about a 1-point lead in that one.
So, Dave, we have another map that you made here, enthusiasm. Let's throw up there on the screen. Can you explain this one to us about enthusiasm gaps and then between Democrats, Republicans, and others? Go ahead and keep this up.
Yes. There. Yeah. So in this one, it's not as much applicable in North Florida as much as it is the rest of the peninsula, which is that if, let's say in a county, 50% of the voters are registered Democrat, if the turnout right now is at 55%, Democratic, that means it's a 5% increase for the Democrats. It shows enthusiasm in the Democratic column at 5%. And then the Republicans look at it on the Republican side, take the difference, and plus is for Democrats, minus is for the Republicans. And as we see in this model right here, we actually have, though in Miami-Dade County, Democrats are expected to win and win quite handily, the amount of registered Republicans turning out to vote is higher than their percentage of their registration And this is where it might become a bit of a problem. So currently we have Republicans performing at about 4% better as far as the turnout compared to the registration numbers in Miami-Dade, compared to only 1% for the Democrats. And these are where those little things you might notice on Election Day might make the difference. But on the other hand, in Central Florida, we're seeing the Democrats do a little bit better than usual. So I think something that Crystal mentioned about yesterday about Georgia, the white suburban voters going for Biden and Hispanic voters maybe not going as strongly for Biden, we're seeing that dynamic happen here in Florida as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I saw, we've seen consistent polling in that regard, not just in Florida, but across the country. But I think maybe even more strongly in Florida, where you've seen this shift among seniors who went for Trump last time, shifting to Biden. And if that was the end of the story and he held his numbers with everyone else, he would be winning Florida handily. But it's the fact that Latinos, and I think the Cuban population in particular, has moved pretty strongly towards President Trump or offsetting those gains. I wonder if you have an analysis of, we've been pretty critical here of like the socialism sucks messaging coming out of the Trump campaign, just because it mostly seems not to be landing. Joe Biden's favorables have gone up over the course of this campaign, which is like kind of an impressive thing for the Trump campaign to have managed. But it did occur to me that if there was one community where it might be landing, it could be in that South Florida, Cuban American community. I wonder if that's your assessment, being there in the state and having studied the trends.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually it, because I've always said, name me the Hillary to Trump voter out there, right? Many of them aren't going to exist. But Miami-Dade might be the exception. And I think we are seeing that play out a little bit now. But then again, I have to say, we kind of saw this trend in 2018 with Gillum and Nelson as well. So I don't know if it's necessarily a message as much as maybe the organization. The Republicans are really good at organizing in South Florida, particularly in Miami-Dade County and oddly enough, Broward County, to bring those margins down. So I've talked to some people yesterday about what's going on down there, and they say the Republicans have just organized well, but they also say that message actually has an impact.
Yeah, very interesting, Dave. Well, thank you so much for joining us and your models. Where can people find out some more of your work?
So actually, I'm just doing it on my Twitter account. So if you can look on that, look on thenumbersguy.com, originally from Chicago. That's why I have to have "the" in there. But yeah, go there and I have the numbers up there.
Sweet. Well, keep up the great work, Dave. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Dave. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, another Dave, friend of the show, David Sirota, is going to join us on how the Georgia Senate race may be the nexus for the broader conversation on healthcare. That's when Rising continues.